Okay, we are live in this motherfucker. I think. Are we? Are we live? Live in this motherfucker. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Live in this motherfucker. Right? That's what we are. Yeah, we're live. This is exciting. This is exciting stuff right here. And, this is really about keeping a promise to myself. For so long, I've just had this idea. I go, I can just, write this video essay. I can do this. I can do that. I was just basically chasing all these methods, these ways. They just weren't me, They just weren't me. And, like anything you do that's not really you, it's on borrowed time. Everything's a fucking pain in the ass. We all know this, right? It's not just the DMV. Everything is a fucking pain in the ass. Getting my iPhone to talk to my fucking MacBook to then work on YouTube streaming. Now, the frustrating thing is, there's fucking a million people doing this right now that have no problem doing it. So, I'll take the rap for it. I'll take the rap for not being, good at technology and stuff. And I'm not. I think well, I'm going to be careful with my words here, but technology and I have kind of an interesting relationship. Let's just say that it seems like it's kind of miraculously sabotaged me here and there. Is it a ghost in the machine? Is it all, an illusion of my imagination? Who could say? But anyway, let's not get distracted. I'm here right now. I'm live. I'm in my studio. I'm doing my show. Now, my studio is in the process of being set up. I got my little synth rack back there. That's a start. Who knows where my actual cameras are? Who knows where my actual microphones are? I'm pretty sure I got some expensive shit somewhere, but it's nowhere to be found. So we go to the trusty Blue Yeti, which I don't know if I've ever used. I think I bought it 10 years ago and it just sat around. Some USB mic. I think my thinking at the time was something like, oh, if you just have a mic that's USB, if you ever go to the mountains or something and you don't really want to bring a lot, you can just throw that in a backpack and plug it in but it never happened. And this is really the story of my life with so many things is, you buy stuff, you got these grand plans, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And, maybe this is just the nature of mankind that you just, you dream and then, life happens and you figure it out. You do what you can. But what's interesting is at a certain point, I just was like, you know what? I just want to start doing this. I just want to start doing this and just going live. I'm just ditching perfectionism. I'm ditching overthinking things. I'm just absolutely like severing space and time. I'm just like cutting a fucking line through space and time. And in the middle of that fucking crease, I'm just acting. I'm just going in. And the fact that there's nobody watching this live stream is totally irrelevant. This was about keeping a promise to myself. And while I did stand up I did some stand up, I played in some bands and stuff, and I really didn't want to go the route of ending up in like hotels and on the road and stuff like that. Look, it may end up happening, so I don't want to completely throw it out, but I did not find that particular lifestyle conducive to my own well-being. It's just the way it was. So, I kind of threw that out, and I think I kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater because I was working at a comedy club, a pretty well-known comedy club, and I just kept seeing that something about live events, well, and especially in a comedy club when you can feel the energy in the room, but there was just something about live that felt completely different to me, completely distinct. You just felt this sense of anything could happen, like the hairs on the back of your neck were standing up. And it's funny because, I was doing the sound, I was running the soundboard at a comedy club, which is almost like a producer role. You bring on the comics, you welcome everybody, da 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 da. You have your whole little speech and you dim the lights and you cue their song. Oh, hey man, do you wanna, come out to this? I remember I brought that comedian Kurt Metzger out one time to Shakedown Street by Grateful Dead. And he gets up and, a lot of comics will reference the song if there's something to say, but he looks right at the sound booth and with a pretty stern look on his face, he was like, "Hey, thanks for the disco intro, sound guy." And I was like, "All right, fair enough." I did go to the green room beforehand and ask him if there was anything in particular that he wanted. He said no. So anyway, that really we awakened. I'm like that Nighthawk Wolf guy or whatever that I keep seeing on my feed. That guy's great. Those small glasses are just perfection. Um, but so I could feel, this sense of live. It's like, oh, this is a really great energy. And I think we see this with like, concerts are probably the best they've ever been. Tickets are $5,000 because it's live, it's real. Now, again, to truly be with the energy is a different experience. But, I also grew up with the Howard Stern show where there was just this beautiful sense of you really couldn't tell what was going to happen, but you could tell the stakes were high. And of course, he had his battle with WNBC, and he had his FCC battles and whatnot. But I just think that there was something raw happening with live shows, and there's something exciting about being in the moment. Now, for this particular broadcast, I have no script. I had some ideas going into it, but this kind of ground level, just do it, was just really more of a, this is like all bonus now. The real challenge was to just get the equipment. I mentioned my relationship with technology. It was to just get the equipment up and running and get, some kind of a basic set or whatever. And then from there, just sort of go, okay, if I can just build the habit of doing this. And I know this is a little meta talking about what I'm going to be doing rather than just doing the thing, but maybe that's a flavor of this show. Maybe part of this show is just being transparent about my own struggles with the creative process and following through and stuff like that. And I don't want it to be a fucking drag, I want it to be fun, but the bottom line is this shit has been really frustrating. And I've lugged gear across America and found a million reasons. Apologies if the mic placement isn't great. I'll listen back later and we can collectively decide if it's working or not. But anyway, all that to say, I've traversed the country, you know, I've been to hell and back trying to figure all this shit out. And one thing became abundantly clear, that at least for my personality, I was never going to get to a point where I was so happy with the script I'd written or man, I had this John Oliver sketch and I bought glasses. They were even prescription, so it made my eyes bigger. It hurt to film it. And I memorized this whole thing. And I even practiced reading on a teleprompter. And, I did this fucking whole thing. And then I just never released it. It just wasn't up to my standards or whatever. So, I've got now like a decade of all these test pilots and da 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 da. The only video you'll see if you look on the archives of this channel, the only video I actually ended up posting was me in some fucking travel trailer I'd bought in the middle of nowhere. That was just basically like life is a failed creative, at 40 years old or something. That was it. And that was just one of those things like this moment right here where I just went, I just got to record something. This is what's on my heart. I'm just gonna put it out. This is enough, you know? I'm not gonna do any fancy editing, and I'm not gonna do because one thing that I think is really interesting is we have this idea of what we think is cool or who we want to be seen as or something like that. We have all these ideas, these ideals, but then at the end of the day, you start to just notice, how you work, how you operate. And certain things I think just become undeniable. You go, look, whether or not I want to be like this, and I do think we can change ourselves. I do think we can apply ourselves. But I've also seen people sort of force transformations to be like, I'm just going to show you, some kid who was, so funny and jovial. And now he's this like serious power lifter and like everything's really important. And I know that sounds so judgmental. Whatever, do whatever you want, choose your own adventure. That really is my philosophy. But you just sort of look at that and you go, I just think when people are who they really are, there's just something compelling and undeniable about that. And I think we all at this point we've been marketed to so much. We've all got bullshit detectors. I mean, maybe you can pull the wool over people's eyes for a while, but you know, all roads lead to being the liver king and being like, no, man, I don't do steroids, I'm natty. And it's like, dude, what are we even doing here now? I mean, it's just that level of lying and deception is absurd. So I think this is all to say that I'm just looking to build something sustainable, to capture the excitement of like live, in the moment, spontaneous creation, because that is really where I feel like I shine. I like talking and I like spontaneous, in the moment creation. And I like it with other people too. I actually feel probably most inspired when, even maybe the conversation gets real. Maybe you're with a friend and they've just been drinking way too much recently and you kind of both know it, and you have that little voice in your head that's like, you should say something, man. Not in some like judgmental, better than you. This is not about preaching or something. Just you go, what I want to hear that if I was sort of spiraling out. And I've had those conversations with people and I didn't plan on them beforehand. And even right before them, you're like, oh man, this could damage the friendship or something like that. So it is risky. But sometimes when you just feel that in the moment, that's where the action is. And I remember, I think it was like Norm and Conan or whatever were talking, and they were talking about, maybe it was just a Conan interview, but he was talking about how Norm was the best guest. And there was just that sense of, you can prep your little stories, or I don't even think Norm did that. I think he wouldn't even run it by people, but you can sort of like try to get the best show set up, but inevitably in the moment, something's going to happen. And you the laugh you can get out of the truth of that moment is bigger than any prepared laugh you could have. And that's like what was going on at the comedy club I was working at was, while the scripted jokes would hit, if you could if you could really get to the truth of the moment, the thing that everyone was sort of feeling, and you could ride that line, there would be no bigger laughs. There would be no greater release. And what was amazing was it was truly magic. I mean, I would see people come into these shows, maybe it's like a Wednesday or something, and people are pissed. They can't find parking. Maybe their date is late or something, and they'd have all kinds of attitude and shit. By the time they left, they were as calm as Hindu cows. They leave with the biggest smile on their face. You could feel their energy was warm and glowing and beautiful. And you'd go, damn, that's the power of a true experience. And in a society that's so like pre-packaged and micromanaged and stuff like that, that's the real shit. Sports, comedy, music, and maybe some live shows, every now and then, probably mostly on like streaming and stuff. But, there's that sense of like, this by nature can't be overly produced or overly packaged. And, even when I was at the comedy club, I thought like, "Oh, man, there's room for, like, a new SNL or something here," but, you know, getting that off the ground seemed like a bit much, but I still think that opportunity is there. Wow, that hit the spot. So, and while you're at it, guys, don't forget, check out a little bit of this. You get into some Krishnamurti, you get into some David Bohm, you might start changing your perspective on stuff. So, but anyway, I can feel the excitement in this moment, and what's amazing is that there's nobody watching. I'm just in a room talking to myself, but just even this process of just knowing that this is just like being broadcast, this is being put out into the world, that is that is sufficiently entertaining and enjoyable. And, God willing, I'll figure out some way to build an audience and have thumbnails and have scheduled premieres coming up, and maybe I'll get more provocative or I'll get more vulnerable. And, maybe in the spirit of being vulnerable or whatnot, I on a deep level, I do feel like America is at a crossroads right now. And I think there's a sort of convergence or confluence of different, um, it's partially technology. Of course, AI would be what's getting most of the press right now. And for good reason. I mean, it really is fascinating. Um, but it's not just AI. I think there was already something in motion, even in like the first Trump presidency. And I think that there's something going on in America. I mean, I even just read an article in the Wall Street Journal that less than half of Americans think capitalism even works anymore. I mean, that's got to be a seismic change. It said it was down from 60% a decade ago, but that's less than half of America believing in capitalism would be unthinkable to my grandfather or something. I mean, that doesn't even sound possible. And yet, here we are. And I don't think this version of capitalism is working. I I don't think that this level of income inequality is working. I mean, just getting gas and groceries, like these basic excuse me, these essentials, these basics that you can look. I don't care what somebody says inflation is or whatever. If I go to the grocery store and I pay $70 and walk out with like not even a full bag of stuff, I'm like, what the fuck? And I'm not going to Erewhon, I don't like cheap shit, but at the same time, I'm down to, shop intelligently, and still there's just nothing you can do. When I look at, my friends that have kids now and what school is, like, what the fuck is school? Especially for like, young boys or boys, whatever. That system seems fucking nightmarish. I had a meeting today that I had to go to that was like 2 hours long. I could not stay awake. And it wasn't like a Zoom meeting, like I was in a room with other people. And I was like, how the fuck do people do this? But what was funny is at the end of the meeting, two guys started kind of going at it. And I was like, some real life like found its way in. But you could tell that there was this sense of like, let's get back to like complacency or whatever. But I don't, we're not going back to some, that's the idea of like make America great again. It's just like, okay, whatever. It can be a catchy slogan or something, but there is no going back. There's no putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. We need to figure out a way to coexist in America, or I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it feels like now is the time. And What's interesting is the collective, I do believe, always has the potential for mass influence, substantial influence, but it needs leadership. The public, set to its own devices, is just a victim of whatever Fox News or whatever tribalized shit that they're being radicalized into. So, which will inevitably pit man against woman, black against white, young against old. I mean, pretty much everything but rich against poor. I mean, that's the only thing that you maybe a Bernie Sanders emerges every now and then, but you saw what they did to him. They buried his ass. And he had to go to the back of the line. You know, it's Hillary Clinton's turn. The Goldman Sachs lady is pulling rank on your Vermont ass. So not ideal, but there was that sort of sense of, oh yeah, this could work, but it was short lived. And now he's just got his little lane where he can make his little points and complaints, and nothing changes, same as it ever was. So, and I don't think that politics is where this is going to really change. I don't think you elect somebody, or that's not, unless you want to go full mustache man and elect somebody who's going to go crazy, which is I don't know, that's not a course that I'm suggesting, or I'm just saying that could be an inevitable conclusion of things not working. And what was the problem in Germany at that time? Hyperinflation, being saddled with basically having to pay off the World War One debts, or whatever you want to call it. So you kind of squeeze people enough and they will get radical. But I guess what I really wonder is, I sort of see people, I'll watch like atheists, debating Christians. And there's some really fascinating stuff on YouTube. There's some really, really wild debates, and just some fascinating perspectives. I'm probably a deist at this point, I'd say. I do believe in God, but organized religion generally rubs me the wrong way. So I can kind of just watch and not really feel like I have a team. And I see some really interesting stuff going on. And then, you'll sort of see, I'll open TikTok and I'll see a woman be like, you know what? I'm just done with men. Men are the worst. And I'll scroll, scroll, scroll. And then there's some guy who's like, dude, never get married. Like, women will just, and I'm like, oh shit, we're having like, I think I've even seen a lot of people just kind of tapping out of dating in general. They're just like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. This isn't worth it. Some people are like 25 looking for a partner to settle down, and they're like, why can't I find anyone? Other people are like 50 and they're like, nah, man, at this point, I just value my peace. Maybe it's some 70-year-old woman and she looks like beautiful and she's radiant, but she's like, no, I have my peace. I have my quiet. It's just not worth it. I've seen enough. I've done enough. So, I think, and then with work, I think we see a lot of people who are just like, my job has been bullshit. Corporate America is bullshit. I'm done with this." And then, with tech, we kind of see that, oh, we've had all these tech advances, but are we really working less? No, the average person is probably busier than they've ever been. All this tech didn't result in a bunch of free time. It resulted in you being able to get an email on Saturday night at 10 p.m. And, there's maybe, depending on what level of job you have, there's the assumption that you're gonna check that, you're gonna get on it. If you're trying to make partner, time to sacrifice. So there's a really interesting, I think basically all the things I'm naming here are symptoms. They're ways that the system is showing you it's these sort of stress fractures. They're the idea of the cliche American dream, the white picket fence, the 2.4 kids or whatever it is. It's not that it's gone. I know people that are living that. It's still there, but there's so many other paths, from the craziest wealth you could ever accumulate to, just like San Francisco and LA and stuff, just like stepping over some passed out person. Are they dead? Like, are we, what? Anyway, I got that meeting. I got to get to at 10 a.m. So We just slide them into the gutter. And it's that sounds, mean to trivialize it. But if you've lived in these cities, it does just hit a certain point where you're like, I don't, they're throwing $100 million a year at this, and I've only seen it get worse. So, what exactly are we assuming is going to change about this? Um, there was that old Louis bit about him being in like Penn Station or something with his little nephew, and he's like, "What happened?" And Uncle Louis, and he's like, "America happened." And it's not just America has probably lifted more people, out of poverty than any other society. So it's not easy to paint with one brush, but America has substantial problems, and if we just focused on healthcare and education, you could probably spend your life working on those 2 problems. I mean, they're that fucked up. They're that substantial. So, I don't know what the fix is for that, for either of those things. I've got some ideas, but, we can save that for another time. But, if we don't address this stuff, what are the chances that Luigi Mangione or like there's that idea that violence is the language of the unheard, and I think that that is totally reasonable to assume that people that are working full-time jobs, that just want the best for their family, that are contributing, that pay taxes, all that stuff, if they feel like all the money I've given to healthcare ends up being worthless when it comes time to use it, if they feel like the housing market is being so fucked over by private equity and, whatever, that they can't afford a house. Like at a certain level of these pieces sort of, you know, coming apart, falling apart at the seams, you just kind of wonder like, well, then A, what's the point of any of this? And B, when it boils over, what are we looking at? Probably something intense. This has been, oh, wow. Mineral water. I can really taste the minerals. But what's interesting is, there's different as things get bad, and I don't know if they're bad now per se. In a way, the world's kind of always what the world is. I'm definitely not, oh, it's apocalyptic. I mean, there's always challenges. That's just the nature of life. But when you see people get squeezed, and this goes back to our Austrian painter example, let's say, when people get squeezed, what do you see? Tribalization, right? You see othering of people. You see people trying to make sense of complicated topics with simple explanations. Right, that's the classic South Park, like, "They took our jobs, they took our jobs," and that's a hilarious way to look at it because you go, "Well, that's not." It's it's so nice to just have a slogan and somebody to point your finger at, but, who's really gonna look at NAFTA? Who's gonna look at the politicians that, presumably people essentially elected to look at how they supported corporate interests and just ship jobs overseas to get cheap, I mean, let's be honest, basically slave labor, essentially, um, so that they could make your shoes cheaper or whatever. So, when that factory shut down in the Rust Belt, that's it. Too bad. I mean, that's just how it goes. Nobody's coming to save you. Those towns just crater. I mean, maybe somebody comes in with some investment and, tries to do something cool, but in general, you're fucked. If you're just some random person in some Ohio town, that town's just crappy now and just has no industry where it used to be making, Tommy Boy style auto parts or whatever. So, we got a little heavy there. Things got a little intense. And, I think that, whatever the show's going to be is going to be some kind of a combination of like personal frontline experience and maybe starting to outline some of the ways to, I want to say kind of like steer us away from, I think, some of the missteps that could happen as this system, let's say, sheds its skin. I was going to say come apart, but we've been nihilistic enough. Let's just say there's a shedding going on. There's a processing of collective trauma and grief. There's an awakening. I think many people are happening. There's an awakening happening to people probably like me or something that grew up feeling like, yeah, America really is the best country. Like this really is and then, while I still think there is a lot to celebrate about the foundational system of America and the promise that really anybody could come here from any land with just the right attitude and, within a generation or two, go from truly rags to riches. And in all fairness, I have seen that people that own restaurants, laundromats. I mean, there are some cool stories that I've lived next to and gotten to know people where, before you know it, a kid's at USC and then he's a doctor, and you went from somebody riding the bus when they got here to your kid or your grandkids driving around in a 7 Series BMW. And it's like, okay, that's cool. That is cool that that works. If you wanted to sacrifice for your kid and they become a doctor and da 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 da, that's awesome. I do think America still works in that kind of cool trajectory. And for that, I think it's one of the more interesting experiments maybe in human history. But there's some other problems going on with some countries that might be influencing us, with some issues in terms of who are our politicians really serving, between, let's say, some international interests and some corporate. It's easy to say corporate greed, but look, they're looking out for their best interest until the average American collectivizes and can provide some sort of, you know, I mean, this is what game theory is, right? If you see the movie A Beautiful Mind, John Nash is essentially figuring out, what are the negotiations that can elicit the optimal result. And as it stands right now, a whole bunch of divided Americans versus very concentrated wealth, at the top of the corporate world, and let's just say some other ones, doesn't stand a chance. It's just like a bunch of little scattered, people all over this way and that, just trying to survive, like chickens with their heads cut off, versus very focused, very well financed, very motivated people. It's not even close. So, I think there is almost a Lord of the Rings element. And I think J.R.R. Tolkien was wise that he knew that it was really like the hobbits, meaning the people that were pure of intention, that were living close to the earth, living in an honest way, that were those who are necessary to, you know, go head to head with some of the more evil forces in the world. Palantir, they use J.R.R. Tolkien too. They admit they're the bad guys. But you know what I mean? Like, that's who has to be rallied in order for this to avoid pure evil. And I do think that pure evil outcome is on the table, and that's scary. That's really scary. But that's okay. I do not believe the future is written yet. I do not think you have to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist or an atheist to what I'm talking about is beyond any of those things. I'm asking us to find our common humanity, decide on what the core baseline human rights, human dignities, what is the society we want to live in? Right now, we're serving it. We need to reverse the flow and create a society that reflects the desires of the people, not just for free shit, not that kind of, the kind that is when you're a contributing member to society, when you're a working member of society, and when you are, let's just say you're fully employed, you're committed, you pay your taxes, you're involved in your community. You should not be fully employed in America, the richest country in world history, as far as I know, and be struggling to buy groceries. That should not be. There should be some kind of a let's just say a way for the government to make that right, you know? That's who I think should be getting not EBT, but some kind of benefits where if you truly are working full time, you should not be struggling to eat and sleep in America. I'm sorry, you shouldn't. And this isn't about raising the minimum wage or something like that. It's about we should not live in a society where we have this much abundance and for contributing members, there's not a just baseline standard of what we should expect life to be like. I don't think that that has to, invalidate capitalism. It's the sign of a mature society. And the resources that show our level of enlightenment are how we treat those. Let's say there are people that can't contribute. If it's demonstrable that you truly can't contribute, that something tragic happened, some act of God, let's call it, that we should be taking care of people like that. And right now, there's just this sense in America where maybe people on TikTok will organize and find some way to give some 88-year-old guy that still has to work at Walmart to pay off medical bills from his dying wife. It's beautiful that TikTok that we can, get our resources together and help that guy. But that means everyone's just depending on some TikToker to go find them. I mean, it's beautiful that we do that, but that's not sufficient. We need the tax dollars are everyone's money being put in. We need those to reflect the will of the people. And as long as we're being, let's say, manipulated by small entitled countries in the Middle East and into forever wars and our own military industrial complex, which we know loves to start a scrap, as long as our money is going to stuff like that, we will not know peace and justice. We're making enemies. We're getting further in debt. If this was just some guy and you were like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm constantly starting bar fights. I'm in irreconcilable, I'm in credit card debt I couldn't pay off in 20 lifetimes. Um, I'm going around s- installing puppet dictators and removing presidents and stuff like that. I mean, it was hard to even imagine a guy if it was a guy doing that, he would be the only person cops would ever need to follow, like the show Cops. Because he'd be so fucking insane that you'd just be like, oh my God, this guy can't not get in trouble. This is all this guy knows how to do. So I remain hopeful, and God willing, whatever this is, whatever grows from this, we'll see. Who knows? I've now done. I can see on my little timer. I've been streaming 38 minutes. I have not had a viewer yet, so this is purely just. This will, I'm gonna wind it down now. This will end up being just an archive. Maybe it's just a guy that talked to himself in a room, or who knows? The future remains to be written. So, to anyone at some future date who sees this and who can feel in my heart my own desire to just get in the mix, to weigh in, and to try to offer some sort of way that we can chart a course forward that doesn't find cheap or easy solutions in tribalism, but instead envisions what we could be if we all could align and moves towards that goal, not with pessimism, but with the kind of hope that's only possible when you can feel you're tapping into the truth and that something true is emerging from you. And it is your job to shepherd that, to share that, and to honor that. So, on that note, I bid everyone a good night or whatever time of day it is when you see this, and thank you for this first little foray into this next chapter in my life. Good night, everyone.